Hello and welcome to the first enterprise-only webinar. My name is Dan Van Dyke, and I'm the Managing Analyst for Payments and E-commerce at Business Insider Intelligence. We're really glad to have you here. So for this first webinar, we're going to be sharing top-level findings from the Amazon Commerce Competitive Edge Report. That was a report my colleague Dan Keys, smart guy, and myself, also confusingly named Dan, put out earlier this year. In subsequent webinars, we're going to be going over content before it's published. So thanks for tuning in to the first one. And how did this whole thing come about? Why did we write the Amazon Commerce Competitive Edge Report? It really came down to inbound client requests. So myself, many other members of my team, were getting questions that essentially asked the same thing in different forms, which is, how do I compete with Amazon despite not having an Amazon-sized budget? So the way we went about answering that was to field a survey that essentially looked at the shopping journey from start to finish. So we were looking at where customers began shopping, the providers they turned to as they shopped, some of the behaviors and perceptions they had related to shopping experiences, and then all the way through to ultimately what might cause them to, say, abandon their cart upon checkout. So with this rich data set, we were able to not only cut by demographic profiles, but also cut by customers of different e-commerce providers. So for example, Overstock, Amazon, Walmart, Target, etc. And with that rich data set, we informed a lot of recommendations that harken back to kind of a vision that Jeff Bezos laid out when he first founded Amazon. So take a trip down memory lane to 1994. Jeff Bezos at that point had a little bit more hair than he does now. Elon Musk, confusingly, had less hair than he does now. And Amazon at that point was just a fledgling company that was founded on a vision of the most customer-centric store on earth. And the means to an end that allowed Jeff Bezos to sort of deliver on that brand promise, that vision, is it began with first taking the disruptive potential of e-commerce to change the way goods and services are delivered. And it's really grown from there. So today, as we all know, Amazon's become sort of this $1 trillion behemoth, and it's really come to embody the vision of an everything store, which Jeff Bezos originally laid out. So on this graphic, which is a really sharp-looking graphic my colleague Greg Magana put together on the e-commerce vertical, this hasn't been shown in the presentation, so this is one of the brand new charts. Take a look at the top right. You can see healthcare. So the PillPack acquisition was Amazon's push into the really hot healthcare space. And instantly, by acquiring this pharmacy provider, Amazon wiped off $20 billion in market capitalizations of pharmacy-related stocks virtually overnight. And that's certainly not an aberration, that's not an exception. Take a look at the center under physical commerce. Of course, we're all familiar with the Whole Foods acquisition in 2017. But what you might not know is that wiped off $40 billion in market capitalizations, according to CNBC. So when you take a look at all the logos on this screen, and some of them are internal divisions and some of them are acquisitions or acqui-hires, the full scale of Amazon's outwards expansion in order to sustain its $1 trillion valuation comes into focus. And I believe that all the hype, all the news cycles, the headlines that are covering its outwards expansion mask a much more actionable and important trend, certainly to an e-commerce audience, which was sort of the intended audience of this report, along with payments providers that service them and the vendors that service them. And that is that Amazon's hold over the e-commerce shopping funnel is only getting stronger and stronger. And that's certainly borne out in the data that you see on this page. So take a look at the bottom left corner. You can see Amazon, as of 2016, had 34% of the market, roughly a third. By 2023, we project that 1 out of every $2 spent online essentially will be going to Amazon. And so to put some dollar figures to that, in 2018, Amazon is projected to have 38% of the e-commerce market, and that works out to $196 billion, a massive figure. Put into perspective, the next 4 providers after Amazon are collectively only garnering $93 billion in e-commerce volume. Let's fast forward a little bit to 2023. So that 49% figure, due to the growth of the e-commerce industry as a whole, is going to translate into $492 billion in e-commerce volume. To put that into perspective, that is more than the government spending of Germany. So Amazon is becoming sort of an economy on its own, and in the process, e-commerce competitors are getting squeezed out. So if you take a look at all other e-tailers, their share is shrinking from 44% in 2018 all the way down to 31% in 2023. So that means they will grow at a roughly 6.3% CAGR, but they will not keep up with the industry growth of e-commerce as a whole. So what is it that allows Amazon to achieve these pretty incredible growth figures? Of course, you can't boil it down to just one thing. It's shipping, it's Prime, it's video. It's this whole connected ecosystem of products and services that have accrued sort of compounding loyalty over time. But I think Jeff Bezos summed it up really nicely back in 2016 when he said that his goal was to make it so that if you aren't a Prime subscriber, you are essentially being financially irresponsible. And we can see the effects of that borne out in our data set. So we can see 32% of customers typically begin shopping on Amazon. Compare that to 49% who are starting to shop on Google and 19% going to other channels that we'll get into and break down later in the presentation. Next, where customers shop. So 26% are only ever shopping on Amazon. There's an additional 69% of shoppers who are shopping on Amazon and some other e-tailers. And in total, 95% of customers are shopping on Amazon. That means only 5% are only shopping on other e-tailers. Tremendous advantage. And then third, what shoppers do when they find a product on Amazon. 34% are simply checking out. Encouragingly, about 2/3, 66%, are going to comparison shop, so you have one last chance to try to convert that customer base if you're a competitor. The purpose of showing all these figures is not to beat a dead horse and say that Amazon is great and Amazon is big. Of course that's true. It's to make a case quantitatively that Amazon's scale is so large that even if your customers are ultimately converting with you, they interact with or they consider Amazon as they shop. So it's necessary to form a counteractive or a counter strategy based on hard data to compete with Amazon today. So what does that look like? I think it's easy to say counteract Amazon. It's more difficult to stretch your budget to do so. So there are multiple ways that you can sort of influence and sway some of those data points that we just hit on. For example, investing in search engine optimization, search engine management can influence how customers begin shopping, whether they turn to you to start their shopping experiences through Google. Investing in online advertisements, social media can help make inroads with some of the younger demographics. And then where customers shop. So you can invest endlessly in building out a sticky, slick online web presence and application. And next, what shoppers do when ultimately they find a product that they want on Amazon. We saw that 95% of customers are shopping on Amazon, so this is an important figure to account for. Again, investing in search equity can influence whether or not you're able to attract comparison shoppers, and building out excellent product descriptions can convert some of those too. But unless, I guess the more important question is not to say, what are all the areas you can invest in, but to take your product roadmap and prioritize them. And we believe that a customer-centric lens is not the only lens that you should consider, but that hard customer data can provide a really vital and important and enriching second lens that you can sort of view the product enhancements on your plate and start to prioritize them with. So as we were taking a look at the data and trying to put into practice this thesis that we could use customer data to inform better recommendations, we were immediately struck with 3 different groups of consumers that stood out based on their behaviors at different stages in the shopping process. So I'd like to introduce you to the 3 segments that we identified in our research. The first segment is made up of shoppers who don't typically begin shopping on Amazon. So these are customers who are starting on Google or other channels. We call them open search shoppers. And they make up 68% of all consumers, 68% of consumers who don't shop on Amazon, 32% do shop, are excluded from this group. And open search shoppers, because of their proclivity to not start shopping on Amazon, are more open than the general population to be influenced with sort of top of funnel marketing strategies. The first question that naturally comes to mind when you think about open search shoppers is, if they're not shopping on Amazon, what specifically are they using to start their shopping journeys? And it breaks down in a few ways. You can see that Google search clearly is enormously influential in how customers start shopping. So 72% of consumers are starting to shop on Google search. And then it really breaks down into a smattering of different channels that other customers use to start shopping. So 28% are either using online ads, they're starting on other e-tailers, maybe they're using deal sites, apps, social media, etc. And so it becomes necessary to not only think about search equity as the end-all be-all, but also spread your bets and sort of rebalance your portfolio as a way to think about it in order to make sure that you are hitting the demographics that you want to hit. So you can cut some of the data that we have by millennials, for example, and see, does social over-index for them. And then I guess the question is raised, or it's naturally, it comes up. Since Google search is so important, how do I compete with Amazon on Google search? Well, for one, Amazon is not, as of the time of publication of the report at least, bidding on Google shopping ads, which we would advocate as a very high ROI channel to invest in. But otherwise, I would recommend getting the most bang for your buck. So not necessarily competing on the most obvious and aggressively sought after search terms, but looking for opportunities to get your value when it comes to search spend. One example of what I was describing comes in the form of Tide. So you can see on the left hand of the screen, Tide, instead of bidding on search terms that you would expect them to bid on, such as detergent or bleach, they bid very aggressively on top of funnel educational search terms like how do I do laundry? How much detergent should I use? How do I read laundry labels? And by doing so, they're able to find and dominate less sought after, less expensive search terms and build brand awareness that can pay off over a lifetime, because customers who are first beginning to do laundry are naturally probably on the younger side. So that's just one example. The report goes into many others, but we had to just highlight the most interesting things in this presentation. I'd like to introduce you to the next segment at this point, which is made up of comparison shoppers. And comparison shoppers are the customers who shop around when they find a product that they want to buy on Amazon. So they're not customers who are in the group who just directly buy that product on Amazon. These are the 2/3, 66% of respondents in this survey who are going to check out other e-tailers and see their options before ultimately checking out. You might be thinking open search shoppers had 68% of consumers, and comparison shoppers had 66%. How does that math work out? There's enormous crossover among these two groups. There's a lot of crossover. The reason we broke them out is that because their behaviors at each of these two different stages calls for different strategies in order to reach the two groups. So by breaking them out into these two different segments, we can sort of amplify those differences that will allow providers to get an edge in attracting each of the two groups. So one question that comes to mind when it comes to strategies for how to reach comparison shoppers is, what are the reasons that are driving them to comparison shop in the first place? And there are many things. As you can see on the screen, one factor clearly dominates. Price is a huge determinant of comparison shopping. So you've got 85% of consumers who say that that is a top reason for comparison shopping. And then it breaks down into the remainder of what we call the 3 Ps. If you're familiar with marketing, you might have heard the term 4 Ps. We call it the 3 Ps to attract comparison shoppers: price, physical store fulfillment, and then ultimately product information. So with 32% of consumers saying that a top reason they comparison shop is to get in-store fulfillment, that's an enormous advantage that providers should take advantage of in order to get a leg up on Amazon. Some, like Target, are already doing so. Next, to get better product information. Again, that is an area where you can compete with Amazon by enriching your product information, by adding things like augmented reality visualizations and, say, video for furniture in order to give customers a great sense of the product before they buy it and ultimately check out with you as opposed to Amazon. But I'd like to narrow in on price specifically. Because like on the last slide with search, the question of how do I compete with Amazon on price begs to be asked. So really in answering that question, I think it's necessary upfront to say competing one-to-one with Amazon on prices is insane. I mean, it won't work for the majority of providers. For some it will. But I think a more salient and broadly applicable strategy is to lean on or lean into promotions, discounts, and in-store fulfillment in order to build a value proposition that isn't purely based on price, but still gives the appearance and the reality of value. So Walmart on the left, you can see a screenshot of how they offer discounts for ship-to-store, in-store fulfillment. So highlighted or boxed in the red there is one price, and then a separate price if customers eschew shipping and instead pick up the item in store. They get about $6.67 off. So that hits on 2 of the priorities that we saw in the previous slide of comparison shoppers. One, it allows them it gives them better price, and then 2, it's also giving them that physical store fulfillment option. And the center is Jet.com. Jet.com tells users that by adding certain products, they will lower the cost of items. So that's kind of like a gamified, fun, engaging way for shoppers to go about achieving value, while also importantly for Jet.com, boosting average order size, growing that basket. And then Overstock.com allows shoppers to spin a wheel in order to receive a discount or perk. I found this particularly fun. I got to research all these providers as I was going about writing this report. The wheel at Overstock.com contains some discounts such as 15% off, 5% off, free shipping, etc. I think oftentimes shoppers today take a lot of the perks that they get from Amazon for granted. If you're able to draw their attention in a non-disruptive way and get them to think about the perks that you're delivering to them, then you can build some appreciation and bring yourself closer to parity with Amazon in the minds of your customers. Final group I'd like to introduce you to, if you haven't read the report, or reintroduce you to if you have, is Amazon loyalists. And Amazon loyalists are the most entrenched, the most loyal group of shoppers that you could hope to target. So these are the 15% of consumers who not only start shopping on Amazon typically, but when they find a product that they want to buy, will just buy that product on Amazon without even shopping around. It begs the question, why even go after the group if they're so bought into Amazon's ecosystem, if they're so tied into them? And I think there's a couple reasons to do so if you are an aggressive provider that has already made strong inroads with not only open search and comparison shoppers. The first reason just comes down to income. So Amazon loyalists earn, on average, $250,000, or 28% of Amazon loyalists earn a household income of $250,000, and that's compared to 22% among all respondents. So high income. Second reason is that they are somewhat attainable. 82% of Amazon loyalists have shopped at a different e-commerce provider besides Amazon in the past year. So they are buying things from providers other than Amazon. What ties them into Amazon's orbit? You know, what their center of gravity is clearly Amazon. Why is that? For one, you know, free shipping is huge. Product selection, fast shipping, prices, product reviews. So this is a multifaceted value proposition, and you can compete with them on one or two or three, but you can't compete necessarily on all those attributes without, you know, creating a prime competitor. So what should providers do? We think, you know, ultimately, if you do make the decision to attack this group, it's necessary to focus in on the dwindling list of product categories or specific brands that Amazon does not yet offer. So that brings us to the end of the sort of overview portion of the presentation. And I'd like to share two brand new slides. This first one is made up of factors that consumers say would cause them to choose between two different e-tailers if the product and the price were exactly the same. We call them tiebreaker features. You can see on the left, one-day free shipping is hugely popular. No surprises there. What's more interesting to me on this slide is take a look at the ability to see product reviews from my friends and family and the ability to search for the product using pictures. You can see really big differences when it comes to shoppers of Amazon and Overstock and Jet.com. Jet.com shoppers are much more into that ability to see, you know, their close social networks, reviews, and visual search. And that really reinforces something important about this presentation that I'd like to touch on, which is the real meat, the most interesting stuff for a large audience will be to see how your individual customers behave and what their specific attitudes are and how they differ from those of your competitors. So if you're watching this, that means you have access to the full data sets. I'd encourage you to take a look and see. We have 8 to 10 different cuts by different e-tailers, so chances are, if you're a large one, you might be represented there. Final slide, and I'm excited about this one, particularly if you're payments audience, and I know there are many of you in attendance. This is the factors that would cause consumers to abandon their cart after they've already added to it and they're at checkout. They could select up to 3. That's why it doesn't add up to 100. On this slide, you can see, again, free shipping is massively influential. More interesting to me is second top reason is that the site forces them to make an account. So it's kind of a Faustian bargain that you're kind of making where, yes, you might be building long-term loyalty. You'll be providing opportunities to hit those customers with emails down the line and make their process of checking out more seamless next time. But you're going to be significantly driving down your conversion in the process. It's not for me to recommend whether or not you'd like to make that approach, that bargain, but something to consider given how high this number is. And next, we've got complicated checkout processes. You know, we've seen a number of buy buttons beginning to, or making signs of consolidating. So there's the plan for MasterCard and Visa and Amex and Discover to combine from what I've heard as the NASCAR effects of multiple buy buttons down to one consolidated, clean buy button. So anything that you can do to optimize that checkout process will be a net positive. And then finally, fast shipping options, unsurprisingly, very popular. So at this point, we've reached the prepared segment, the end of the prepared segment of the presentation. I'd like to take a look and see what questions have come in and answer those on the fly. Excuse me, I'm just going to pull up this sheet right now. So I have a few questions that were submitted in advance. I'm going to try to get through those and then hit everything else before we run out of time. The first one we have is, what are the recommendations for companies outside of the top 10 to compete despite, you know, more limited budgets? I think, you know, I had a lot of interesting conversations for this report. We talked to a lot of the vendors that service e-commerce companies, we talked to e-commerce companies themselves, and we talked to the analyst community as well. I was speaking to an analyst who said some smart things I agreed with, Tom Gahani, who said that it's necessary for companies to develop a unique and distinctive voice, was the way he put it. And he gave 2 examples. So one company is kind of like a hip millennial shoe company. It's called Allbirds. If you've ever been to Silicon Valley, you've probably seen a lot of techies wearing them. They use interesting sort of unusual tree fibers materials in their shoes, and they use wool. So those are materials not typically found in shoes. That makes them unique. Second example was Warby Parker. So Warby Parker, another hip company, they also they will donate a pair of glasses for each of the trendy glasses they sell. So that's 2 examples of how to live up to that distinctive sort of ethos. I personally would recommend to a small e-tailer the same thing I would recommend to a large e-tailer, which is that focusing on the fundamentals and the basics is critically important. So for this report, we did some user testing. So we used Google's test tools in order to stack up the load times of top 10 e-tailers, and we found huge variances when it comes to 3G and 4G load times, just among the top 10, who you'd think would be on sort of similar ground. So where Amazon might take just a few seconds to load, we were seeing some providers stretching 14, 15 seconds. That won't cut it. Attrition will be the reality. And I think that's one of the, I guess, stereotypes of millennials that I feel is pretty accurate, is not wanting to wait for things to load and having limited attention spans sometimes. Secondly is, what are some of the best practices in omnichannel? As I was writing this report, I sort of unexpectedly got an email that really impressed me. It was from CVS, and CVS saw that I had typically been buying shaving cream and shaving razors on a consistent basis. They pushed out a targeted email for me, giving me a couple bucks off both those items, and then also telling me where I could go, which store was nearest by my house, and not only that, but which aisle I could go to find the item. So I think that's kind of an example of the next frontier of omnichannel, thinking beyond just omnichannel as a fulfillment channel to more holistically, what can you do to reduce the friction as customers go about the typical ways that they shop, which is not confined to one channel, even if you as a retailer are. And then finally, how do I get the most out of the email marketing channel? I think email marketing is not often viewed as particularly exciting, but I think it can be a tremendously useful channel. And this was another experiment that we ran as we were doing this report. I had my colleague, Greg Magana, go out and buy items from a number of different e-tailers and just track, using incognito mode, turning off cookies so they couldn't track him. What would he receive as a blank slate customer in terms of email marketing? We found that Amazon and Walmart were sending out very few emails, and we found that the remainder of companies were pushing out tons of emails with virtually no relevance to not only the product that he bought, but him as a person, as a customer. And so I would say, I would advocate for a less is more approach that takes the long view, tries to develop a better sense of your customer, to have enough inputs in terms of purchase history in order to generate smart recommendations, targeted emails, before creating a reputation for irrelevance that will ultimately drive down your open rates. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. We're reaching 2:30. I want to thank you so much for joining us for this first webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. Besides that, we're going to have the webinar uploaded on the website and maybe sent to your inbox soon, so look for that. It's been a pleasure having you here. Once again, my name is Dan Van Dyke, and have a good rest of your day.